The room buzzed with anticipation. Cameras flashed, and the air felt electric, like the calm before a storm. Politicians, pundits, and press filled the space, each eye trained on the stage, waiting for the next moment to unfold. Tension rippled through the audience like a live wire, but no one knew exactly what was coming. The debate was supposed to be another ordinary clash of ideologies. But this? This was something different. Donald Trump stood at the podium, a smirk creeping across his face, his voice thick with sarcasm. He leaned into the microphone, turning toward Kamala Harris, who stood just a few feet away, cool, composed, as always. Her eyes, locked on him, showed nothing. No hint of fear, no flicker of doubt. She knew the game. But no one could have predicted the insult that was about to fly. Without a second thought, Trump's voice sliced through the tension, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "You're not cut out for this job," he sneered, his eyes glinting with contempt. "Just look at your track record. You've been a disaster." The words hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and deliberate. It wasn't just a jab, it was a public humiliation, a strike meant to wound. The audience collectively held its breath. You could feel the shift in the room. Every pair of eyes turned from Trump to Harris, waiting for her response. Would she let this slide? Or would she fight back? The room fell silent. No one dared to breathe. The camera zoomed in on Harris, her face unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like time had stopped. Then, the crowd waited for the inevitable, the retort, the fire, the comeback. Would Harris crumble under the weight of Trump's words? Would she sink to his level? Or was there something deeper at play here? Something much, much more dangerous for the man who thought he could dismiss her with a sneer. The silence stretched on, thick with anticipation. And then, the question lingered in the air, what would she do next? The world was watching. What seemed like a typical debate was about to spiral into something far greater, something that could change the course of history. This wasn't just about two people clashing over policy. No, this was about far more than that. This was a battle for America's soul. The battle for who gets to define the future of the nation. The moment Trump mocked Kamala Harris, it wasn't just a personal attack, it was an attack on everything she represented. Kamala Harris wasn't just a vice president. She wasn't just an elected official. She was a symbol, a beacon for millions of Americans who had long been pushed to the fringes of power, excluded from the narrative, or told that their voices didn't matter. Immigrants, minorities, women, those who had been historically underestimated, saw themselves in Kamala. She was their voice. Her victory was their victory. Her presence in that room, in that moment, was the embodiment of a long-fought struggle for representation. But Donald Trump, he was the very opposite of everything Harris stood for. A man who rose to power by feeding on division, by stoking the flames of hate and bigotry, by claiming that the only people who mattered were those who looked and thought like him. His entire political career had been built on the idea that there were winners and losers, and to him, Harris and people like her were firmly in the loser category. For Trump, it wasn't just about power, it was about domination. The way he mocked Harris, belittling her in front of the nation, was part of a broader strategy to make his opposition look weak. To make sure that anyone who dared to challenge him, especially someone like her, would never stand a chance. He couldn't let the public forget that in his eyes, she was nothing more than a token, an afterthought in the grand scheme of power. And if he had his way, that would stay the narrative. But this time, something was different. Kamala Harris wasn't the type to bow down, to play the role he assigned her. For years, she had been underestimated, her strength, intellect, and resilience ridiculed. She'd endured it all, the whispers, the critiques, the doubts. But each attack only fueled her resolve. And now, in that room, under the bright lights and the weight of America's gaze, Harris stood poised for something monumental. What was coming next? This wasn't just a simple back-and-forth. What Trump had done was far worse than a political jab. It was an affront to everything she, and so many others, had worked for. And she knew it. For Harris, this wasn't just about politics. This was personal. This was about the dream of America itself. An America that values justice, equality, and the belief that everyone, no matter their background or identity, deserves a seat at the table. And what happened next? Well, it was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The world was about to witness a showdown that would send shockwaves across the country. The stakes couldn't have been higher. A single moment was about to unfold, a moment that would define the rest of the debate, the rest of their careers, and the direction of American politics itself. If Harris played her cards right, this could be her chance to prove that the future of America wasn't one shaped by arrogant, divisive men like Trump, but by leaders who embodied the very values America was supposed to stand for. This moment, this exchange, was bigger than them. It was about the fight for dignity and decency in the face of hate. What happened next would define the future of American politics. Donald Trump was no stranger to controversy. In fact, controversy was his currency. From his earliest days in the public eye, he made a name for himself by pushing boundaries, whether in business, television, or politics. But there was one constant throughout it all, his willingness to tear others down to lift himself up. It didn't matter if it was a business rival, a political opponent, or even a seasoned politician. Trump's method was always the same: mock, belittle, and dominate. He didn't build success by being humble or diplomatic. No, he thrived on conflict, chaos, and a brand of bravado that was as exaggerated as it was toxic. In the world of real estate, Trump had earned his reputation not just as a businessman, but as a man who never played by the rules. His empire was built on a mix of ambition, bold moves, and, at times, sheer bluster. The stories of his business practices were legendary, his willingness to bulldoze his way through any obstacle, legal or ethical, with a win-at-all-costs mentality. Whether it was stiffing contractors or filing bankruptcies to avoid paying his debts, Trump seemed to have perfected the art of bending the system in his favor. But in the public eye, it wasn't just his business tactics that defined him. It was the way he conducted himself, arrogant, dismissive, and unapologetic. When Trump made his move into politics, it wasn't much of a surprise that the same tactics followed him. The 2016 presidential campaign marked a dramatic shift in American political culture, one where insults replaced policies, mockery replaced diplomacy, and personal attacks were just as common as campaign promises. Trump was the master of the insult, the perfect foil for anyone who dared stand in his way. His Twitter feed became a battleground where no opponent was safe, from fellow Republicans to Democrats to entire ethnic groups. He tore into anyone who threatened his vision of America. And, as he rose to power, the same pattern repeated itself over and over. His opponents, whether it was Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, or anyone else, were never seen as equals. To Trump, they were simply losers. But it wasn't just his political rivals who felt the wrath of his words. Trump had a particular penchant for belittling women and minorities, groups he often dismissed with demeaning comments. Whether it was mocking the physical appearance of female politicians or using racist tropes to attack Black and Latino communities, his rhetoric struck deep. It wasn't just about disagreement. It was about dehumanization. He didn't just want to win the argument, he wanted to crush the very people who disagreed with him, to strip them of their dignity. And that's exactly what Kamala Harris had become to him, a symbol of everything he despised. A woman of color, a daughter of immigrants, and a force in the political world who represented the very values he had spent years trying to erode. To Trump, Harris wasn't just a political adversary, she was a threat to his narrative of power. The way she represented everything he thought America should not be, unapologetically progressive, inclusive, and unafraid to challenge the establishment, was a challenge to his entire worldview. Trump's attack on Harris wasn't random. It wasn't just about her policy positions or her political record. It was personal. He could see the writing on the wall: she was a rising star, a woman who could represent the future of American politics in a way that he never could. And for a man whose entire identity was tied to dominance, the idea of someone like Harris, who stood for unity, fairness, and truth, was an affront he couldn't ignore. For Trump, this wasn't just about winning the debate. This was about sending a message. His mockery wasn't just a response to an opponent, it was a means of reasserting control. In his mind, if he could diminish her, belittle her in front of the nation, he could reaffirm his position at the top. It was a tactic he had used time and time again. Attack, diminish, and isolate anyone who stood in his way, until they were nothing more than a blip on his radar. But there was one thing Trump didn't count on: Kamala Harris wasn't just another opponent. She wasn't someone who could be knocked down by his usual tactics. She wasn't intimidated by his bravado or swayed by his insults. In fact, she had spent a lifetime being underestimated by people like him. And now, facing his mockery head-on, she was ready to show him, and the world, what she was truly made of. Trump's attack, laced with his characteristic arrogance and disdain, had backfired. What he saw as a moment to reassert his dominance was about to become his biggest mistake. Kamala Harris knew what it was like to face ridicule. Her journey to the Senate, to the vice presidency, had been full of hurdles, each one designed to undermine her, to question her worth, to push her to the sidelines. The daughter of immigrant parents, she had always been the other. The child of a mother from India and a father from Jamaica, Kamala didn't fit the traditional American mold. And growing up in the Bay Area, she learned early on that being different was both a blessing and a curse. She was no stranger to adversity. From the time she entered the world of politics, Kamala had faced a constant barrage of questions about her identity, her background, and her ability to succeed in a world that often seemed stacked against her. She was a woman of color, and someone with strong, progressive views. Each of these things made her a target. But instead of shrinking in the face of this constant questioning, Kamala stood firm, built a career of service, and leaned into the very qualities that others tried to diminish. As a young prosecutor, Kamala Harris didn't just take the easy cases. She went after the tough ones, the ones that others might have ignored. She didn't simply play by the rules, she sought to change the rules. As District Attorney of San Francisco, she fought to reform a system that too often left the most vulnerable behind. She wasn't just another politician looking to advance her career. Kamala's every move was guided by a deep sense of justice, an unshakable belief that the law could be a force for good, not just a tool of power. But the road to success was never easy. As she climbed the political ladder, there were always whispers. She's too ambitious. She's just a token. She'll never make it. And each time, Kamala proved them wrong. She didn't need to shout louder or make her presence known in the way that some of her male counterparts did. Her strength lay in her calm, in her methodical approach, in the quiet but powerful resolve to fight for what was right, no matter how hard the fight. When she became the first woman of color to serve as California's Attorney General, Kamala faced a new wave of scrutiny. Critics said she was too soft on crime, too tough on criminals. They criticized her policies, even as she made historic strides in criminal justice reform. But Kamala's resolve only strengthened. She understood that true leadership wasn't about pleasing everyone, it was about doing what was right, even when it wasn't popular. And it was that unwavering commitment to justice, that quiet confidence in the face of criticism, that set her apart from the rest. Then came the Senate. Kamala Harris made history again, this time becoming the second African-American woman ever elected to the U.S. Senate. But even in the hallowed halls of Congress, the whispers didn't stop. She was still too ambitious. Still too vocal. Still too different. But that never stopped her. Instead of backing down, Kamala leaned in even harder. She was a fighter, not just for her own future, but for the future of all the people who had been left out, who had been ignored by a system that wasn't designed for them. And then, in 2020, Kamala Harris became Vice President of the United States, making history once again as the first woman, the first black woman, and the first woman of South Asian descent to hold the office. It was the culmination of years of relentless hard work, sacrifice, and overcoming every obstacle in her path. But what Kamala knew, what she'd always known, was that her victory was never just about her. It was about the millions of people she represented. It was about the single mothers struggling to make ends meet, the young girls who dreamed of leadership but never saw anyone who looked like them in positions of power, the immigrants who were told they'd never belong. Every step Kamala took was a step for all of them. And every win she had was a win for the people who had been told, time and time again, that they didn't matter. Kamala's ability to remain calm under pressure wasn't just a trait, it was her greatest strength. While others buckled under the weight of the public spotlight, while they fought back with anger, with chaos, with noise, Kamala responded with grace. Her quiet confidence, her steady hand, her ability to pause before speaking, to consider her words carefully, it made her unlike any other. In a world where people often screamed for attention, she didn't need to shout. She knew her power came from something deeper. It wasn't about the loudest voice or the most aggressive attack. It was about strength rooted in conviction, in truth. And that's why, when Trump turned to her on that stage, mocking her, trying to belittle her in front of the nation, Kamala wasn't rattled. She knew this moment wasn't about him. It wasn't about him trying to knock her down or prove a point. It was about something much bigger. Trump could mock her all he wanted. He could throw every insult in the book her way. But Kamala Harris had something he would never understand: resilience. And it was that resilience, that deep-seated belief in what was right, that would fuel her response. She had been underestimated her entire life. But Kamala Harris wasn't just playing the game, she was changing it. The moment Trump mocked her, Kamala knew this was just another attempt to drag her into his chaos. But she wasn't going to take the bait. Because she understood something Trump didn't: there was power in stillness, in composure, in standing firm in the face of mockery. She would rise above, not by matching his insults, but by showing America what real leadership looked like. And what happened next? Well, it would leave him speechless. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. What began as a political sparring match had quickly morphed into a high-stakes showdown. Trump, emboldened by the initial mockery, now seemed determined to push Harris further, to make her crack. His attacks grew sharper, more personal, as he leaned into the microphone again, his voice dripping with contempt. "Kamala," he sneered, his eyes narrowing. "You talk about progress, but look at your record. It's a mess. You've been part of a system that's failed the American people, and yet you act like you're the one who's going to save us. How? By giving out more free stuff and calling it justice?" The audience shifted uneasily. Trump's words were meant to provoke, to ignite a fire in Harris, to pull her into the chaos he thrived on. He had made a career of dominating the room, of turning every conversation into a spectacle of mockery and bravado. He wanted to see Harris flinch. He wanted to see her anger, her frustration, her moment of weakness. But that wasn't what he got. Kamala Harris remained calm. Her posture was steady, her expression unshaken. She didn't flinch, didn't show the slightest crack in her composure. Instead, she simply smiled, a small, knowing smile that was more of a signal than anything else. It wasn't a smile of arrogance, but one that communicated something far more powerful. She knew exactly what he was doing, and she wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of reacting. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice smooth but firm, "I think you're mistaken about what progress looks like. Progress isn't about tearing people down. It's about lifting them up. It's about making sure every American, regardless of their background, gets a fair shot." Her words were measured, deliberate. She wasn't reacting, she was responding. Every syllable she spoke was a quiet deflection of his chaos. But Trump wasn't finished. The more Harris held her ground, the more he seemed to lose his grip. He leaned forward, his voice rising. "You want fairness? You want equity? Tell me how you're going to fix this country when you're too busy handing out free handouts to people who don't deserve it. You think you can talk about unity while you divide this country into the haves and the have-nots? You're just playing to the crowd, Kamala. His words were laced with frustration now. His trademark confidence had started to crack. He couldn't understand why she wasn't rattled. He had watched other opponents crumble under his attacks. His style was supposed to dominate, to break them down. But Harris? She wasn't flinching. She wasn't rising to the bait. Every insult seemed to bounce off her like water off a duck's back. It was as if the more he pushed, the calmer she became. The crowd, already on edge, was waiting for something, anything, that would break her composure. They wanted a moment of drama, a visceral response that would let them feel the tension, that would give them the satisfaction of a back and forth. Trump's voice grew louder, more insistent, but Harris remained steadfast, her face unbothered, her body language calm. "Mr. Trump, let me make this clear," Harris continued, her voice now cutting through the rising tension in the room like a sharp knife. "I'm not here to play games. I'm here because I believe in America. I believe in an America where people don't have to choose between healthcare and food, where they don't have to decide whether they can afford their rent or their prescription medications." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the room. "I believe in an America where everyone, no matter their race or income, has the opportunity to succeed. And I'll fight for that America every single day." The room grew still, hanging on her every word. The contrast between Harris's calm, measured speech and Trump's increasingly agitated outbursts could not have been starker. Harris wasn't just staying calm, she was setting the stage for something bigger. It was as though she was inviting the storm to rage around her, knowing that she held the eye of the hurricane in her hands. Trump was rattled. His eyes narrowed, his face flushed with a mix of irritation and disbelief. He had spent his entire career dominating the room with his relentless barrage of insults, expecting his opponents to crack, to show weakness. But Harris wasn't budging. In fact, the more he tried to escalate, the more composed she became. It was as if his attempts to break her only made her stronger. "Really?" Trump shot back, incredulous. "You're talking about fairness and opportunity? You're the one who's been part of the system for years, don't pretend like you're above it. You've been on the inside, Kamala. You've done nothing but enable the very people who've kept this country divided." The tension in the room was unbearable now. Trump's frustration was evident, his words sharp and cutting. But Harris didn't flinch. She simply held his gaze, her calm unwavering. She had been through too much, too many battles, too many slings and arrows, to let him win this one. And more than that, she understood something Trump didn't: calm was the weapon he couldn't counter. The crowd, hanging on the edge of their seats, was waiting for the next move. Would Trump escalate further? Would Harris finally snap? Or would this moment, this battle of wills, continue to build until it reached its inevitable, explosive conclusion? For now, the room held its breath, knowing that whatever happened next would change the course of the debate, and perhaps, the future of American politics, forever. The room was thick with tension. Trump's words, though harsh and filled with venom, hung in the air like a storm cloud waiting to burst. His insults had failed to break Kamala Harris. In fact, the more he pushed, the calmer and more composed she seemed. The crowd was on edge, their eyes darting between the two, waiting for the pivotal moment, the moment that would either elevate Harris or allow Trump to claim victory. Kamala Harris didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to shout. In fact, it was her very stillness that made the next moment so much more powerful. She had given him enough rope to hang himself. Now, it was time to show the world what true leadership looked like. Trump's eyes were narrowed in frustration as he leaned forward again. His voice, now more insistent and sharp, cut through the room. "You talk about opportunity, Kamala, but all you've done is create more division. You've done nothing but push this country further apart. You've pandered to the left-wing agenda, and all it's done is weaken this nation." The crowd murmured uneasily, sensing the energy shift, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Trump's voice had grown louder, more desperate. He could feel the power slipping from his hands, and he knew that if he didn't land a decisive blow now, Harris would walk away the victor. But it was already too late. Harris wasn't rattled. She was ready. Kamala Harris paused. The room was deathly silent. She wasn't in a hurry. There was no rush. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of reacting hastily. The calm in her eyes was unnerving. And as she leaned into the microphone, there was a sharpness in her gaze that cut through Trump's bluster like a razor. "Mr. Trump," she began, her voice steady and unshaken, "it's not about what you say. It's about who you're willing to tear down to make yourself feel bigger." The room seemed to hold its breath. Every word she spoke seemed to land with weight, each syllable calculated, deliberate. Trump's smirk wavered slightly, but he refused to back down, continuing to stare her down. But Kamala wasn't finished. "You've spent your entire life using people, manipulating them, tearing them down to build yourself up. You've spent your entire political career treating people as objects to be discarded, people who don't look like you, people who don't share your views, people who don't have the money or the privilege to fight back," she continued, her voice unwavering. "And you think you can lecture me on unity?" The crowd was on edge, the silence now deafening. Kamala's words pierced the room like a dagger, each one hitting its mark with precision. Trump's face was turning a shade of red, his jaw clenched tightly as if holding on to his pride for dear life. But it was clear now, he had lost control. Kamala was taking the reins of this conversation, and she wasn't letting go. "This is bigger than you, Mr. Trump," Kamala said, her tone growing more resolute. "This is about America. And the people you've spent years dismissing, the people you've belittled, they're done. We're done with being told we don't matter. Done with being the punchline of your jokes." She let the words hang in the air, and for the first time, Trump seemed to falter. "You want to talk about division?" Kamala continued. "You, who have spent years sowing hatred, spreading fear, stoking the flames of bigotry and division. You, who can't even look past your own ego to see the suffering of the people in this country. You're right about one thing, this country is divided. But it's people like you who have made it that way." The room was electric. The audience was on the edge of their seats, as if they had all just collectively woken up to a deeper truth. This wasn't just a political fight, this was a battle for the soul of America. Kamala paused again, her eyes locked on Trump, and in that brief silence, the weight of her words sank in. Trump, visibly rattled, attempted to interject, but Kamala wasn't done. She raised a hand, a gesture that was calm but firm, signaling that the moment belonged to her. She had control now, and there was no turning back. "You think you can tear us down, but you're wrong," she said, her voice rising just slightly with the strength of her conviction. "Because the truth is this, the people of America aren't going to be bullied any longer. We're not going to let your divisive rhetoric define us. We're not going to let you tear apart the very fabric of this nation for your own gain. And that's a lesson you'll never learn." Trump stood there, speechless. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. His face, once flushed with anger, had turned pale. The smirk that had once graced his lips had vanished. The reality of what Kamala had just done, what she had just said, was sinking in. The room had gone completely silent. Every single person in that room, every eye, was fixed on Kamala Harris, watching as she dismantled everything Trump had built. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she spoke them, calm, controlled, and unwavering in her conviction. And in that moment, Kamala Harris wasn't just winning a debate. She was winning the moral battle. She was reminding the American people that dignity, truth, and integrity still had a place in this country. That, despite all the insults, despite the years of mockery, there was still room for decency. The crowd erupted into applause. A standing ovation, something that was never given lightly. Kamala stood tall, her calm presence a stark contrast to Trump's flailing desperation. Trump looked around, unable to comprehend what had just happened. He had lost control of the room, and with it, any hope of winning this exchange. Kamala didn't bask in the applause. She simply nodded, acknowledging the moment but not letting it consume her. She knew this wasn't about the crowd's reaction. This wasn't about her ego. This was about sending a message that America was ready for something different. Ready for leadership rooted in respect, in unity, in truth. And for Trump? The message was clear: his reign of mockery, his divisive rhetoric, had met its match. Kamala had spoken. And for the first time in the debate, Trump had nothing left to say. The moment Kamala Harris delivered her devastating counterattack, the room erupted in applause. But that was just the beginning. Outside the debate hall, the world began to feel the tremors. Within hours, the shockwaves of her response spread across every corner of the internet, igniting a firestorm of conversation that no one could have predicted. Social media platforms exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Kamala claps back, hashtag truth prevails, and hashtag Harris takes the win were trending worldwide within minutes. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, every platform was flooded with reactions from ordinary citizens and high-profile figures alike. The memes were swift, brutal, and overwhelmingly in her favor. One meme showed a cartoon of Trump drowning in a sea of words, with Kamala standing calmly above, her finger held up as if to silence him. Another showed a picture of Trump's stunned face, with the caption, "When you realize you just tried to bully the wrong woman." The response was a wave of digital applause, a wave that couldn't be stopped. The internet had spoken, and it was clear: Kamala Harris had not only won the debate but had delivered a decisive blow to the Trump narrative. Even in the midst of the frenzy, public figures from across the political spectrum weighed in. Democratic leaders couldn't contain their admiration. Senator Elizabeth Warren tweeted, "Kamala just reminded us all that real leaders don't need to shout, they stand firm and speak truth." Bernie Sanders, while more reserved, also weighed in, praising Harris for her calm strength and unwavering commitment to justice. The reaction was one of unity, one that showed the progressive wing of the party rallying behind a shared message of dignity, truth, and integrity. But it wasn't just Democrats who were reacting. The memes were spreading like wildfire, reaching celebrities, activists, and influencers across the globe. Beyoncé posted a simple video of her clapping with the caption, "Respect is earned, not demanded." The video went viral within hours, and her followers flooded the comments with words of praise for Harris. On the other side, the reactions from Trump's camp were frantic and defensive. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Trump's team scrambled to spin the narrative. Campaign surrogates tried to downplay the significance of the moment, claiming that Harris's response was too rehearsed or manipulative, but their words lacked the same impact. The reality was clear: Trump had lost this round, and no amount of damage control could erase the fact that Kamala Harris had not only stood her ground but had humiliated him on national television. Trump himself was unusually silent in the immediate aftermath. Gone were his usual fiery tweets, the ones that would normally flood his feed with insults and barbs aimed at anyone who dared to challenge him. Instead, there was a noticeable gap, a moment of silence where Trump seemed to have been left speechless. His followers, once eager to rally behind him, were left trying to defend the indefensible. It was an awkward silence, a silence that spoke louder than any words. And still, the ripple effects continued. As the day wore on, the media outlets picked up the story. The headlines were everywhere: Kamala Harris delivers devastating blow to Trump in debate, Harris proves dignity can win over arrogance, and Trump left speechless as Kamala Harris claims victory. Major news networks ran the footage on loop, replaying her response over and over again. Political commentators were split, some tried to downplay the significance, but the overwhelming consensus was that Harris had not only won the debate but had shifted the narrative in a way that could have long-term implications for both her career and the country. Even the conservative pundits, once quick to dismiss her, were forced to acknowledge the impact. Kamala Harris just proved that she is not someone to be underestimated, one conservative commentator reluctantly admitted. Whether you agree with her politics or not, you cannot deny that she has a strength about her that is undeniable. Trump will need to rethink his approach to her from now on. But it wasn't just the pundits or the politicians who had something to say. The everyday people, those who had been watching, waiting for a moment like this, made their voices heard, too. In every corner of the internet, from Twitter threads to Facebook groups, from Reddit posts to TikTok reactions, the consensus was the same: Harris had handled Trump's attack with grace, intellect, and dignity, something his usual targets rarely managed to do. The most striking reactions, however, came from the immigrant communities that Harris had always championed. As the first woman of South Asian and African descent to serve as vice president, Kamala represented more than just a political office. She was a symbol of hope for people who had always been told they didn't belong. For them, this was a personal victory. Messages poured in from across the country, especially from young women of color. "This is what real power looks like," one tweet read. "She didn't shout, she didn't stoop to his level. She stood there and took him down with nothing but the truth." Another message, from a young immigrant woman in California, read, "This is why I believe in America. Because people like Kamala Harris show us that no matter where you come from, you can rise up and shut down hate." By the time the debate ended and the coverage began to slow, the message was clear: Kamala Harris wasn't just a politician. She wasn't just a challenger to Trump's vision of America. She had become a symbol of something much bigger, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the idea that truth, no matter how hard the fight, would always prevail over arrogance and fear. For Trump's camp, the aftermath was a wake-up call. The battle for the nation's heart and soul had just shifted. The future of American politics had taken a sharp turn, and it was clear that the forces of division, ridicule, and hate had met their match in Kamala Harris. Her victory in this moment wasn't just a political win, it was a defining moment that would resonate for years to come. The applause from the debate hall had faded, but the echoes of Kamala Harris's words continued to reverberate across the country. The viral reactions, the memes, the hashtags, they were more than just fleeting moments of internet fame. They were a reflection of something much deeper, a hunger for truth, for dignity, and for leadership that held firm against the tides of hate and division. Kamala Harris didn't just win a political debate, she won something far greater. She reminded America of its core values, values of respect, of unity, and of the belief that, no matter the odds, dignity and truth will always prevail over the forces that seek to divide us. In that pivotal moment, when Trump unleashed his insults, Kamala could have chosen the path of escalation. She could have matched his venom with anger, with sharp retorts and divisive language. It would have been easy to stoop to his level, to play his game of mockery and chaos. But she didn't. Instead, she stood tall, unwavering in her commitment to what was right. She responded not with bitterness, but with grace. Not with hate, but with truth. In doing so, she didn't just dismantle Trump's attack. She elevated the conversation to something more meaningful, a conversation about what America truly stands for. Kamala's response wasn't just a personal victory. It was a statement to every person who had ever been told they weren't enough, that they didn't belong. It was a message to every young girl who was told her voice didn't matter, to every immigrant who was made to feel like an outsider, to every person who had ever been silenced by the forces of hatred and prejudice. Kamala's response was their response. Her strength was their strength. Her resilience was their resilience. America, she said, isn't about tearing people down. It's about lifting them up. In a world where division had become the norm, where the loudest voices often sought to drown out the truth, Kamala reminded us all that the true strength of this nation lies not in its ability to divide, but in its capacity to unite. She reminded us that leadership isn't about who can shout the loudest or who can sling the most insults. Leadership is about courage, the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the road is hard. Leadership is about integrity, the ability to stay true to your values, no matter how hard the fight. Leadership is about service, the willingness to fight not for personal gain, but for the common good. And it was in that moment, in her quiet yet powerful response, that Kamala Harris became more than just a politician. She became a symbol of hope, a reminder that no matter how loud the noise gets, the truth will always rise to the surface. Her victory wasn't just about shutting down Trump's rhetoric. It was about reminding America of the better angels of its nature, the dignity that comes with respect for others, the strength that lies in unity, and the power of truth to cut through the noise. This was a moment that would be remembered for years to come, not just for what was said, but for what it represented. In a time when the fabric of the nation seemed to be fraying at the edges, Kamala Harris showed America that the threads of dignity, respect, and truth were still intact. They were still strong. And they were still worth fighting for. When the debate ended, the applause faded, and the cameras turned off, the message was clear: America was ready for something different. It was ready for leaders who would stand with the people, not above them. It was ready for leaders who understood that real strength lies in the ability to remain calm in the face of adversity, to be unwavering in the pursuit of justice, and to show the world that truth is not just a weapon, it's a light that guides us forward. Kamala Harris had shown the country what true leadership looked like. And in doing so, she had redefined what it meant to fight for the soul of America. It wasn't about who could shout the loudest. It wasn't about who could win the most votes or make the most headlines. It was about who could hold the line of truth, who could stand tall in the face of mockery and hatred, and who could lead with dignity and respect. That's the kind of leader we need. And that's the kind of America we can, and should, be. Kamala Harris didn't just stand up to Donald Trump, she stood for something much greater. In the face of mockery and division, she showed us that dignity and truth always rise above hate. She proved that real leadership is about calm strength, resilience, and the courage to fight for what's right, no matter the cost. What we witnessed wasn't just a debate, it was a defining moment for America. A moment that reminds us that we, too, have the power to choose respect over ridicule, unity over division. In a world that often seems divided, Kamala Harris showed us that there's a better path, a path of dignity, truth, and hope for the future. If you believe in those values, if you believe that truth matters more than mockery, that unity is stronger than division, then it's time to make your voice heard. This isn't just about politics. This is about creating a movement for positive change, for a more just, respectful future where dignity isn't just a word, but a way of life. Share this video, subscribe to stay connected, and be part of something bigger. Join the movement for a future where we rise together, where respect, truth, and unity define the direction we move in. Together, we rise.